Hey, this is Anthony, and I'm the host of What They Did Not Teach You in School, the podcast that interviews people to get their wisdom recorded so that hopefully you could learn some things that are not taught in school, but should be taught in school. I'd like to remind people that a lot of the things talked about on this podcast relate to investing and finance. The purpose of talking about these subjects are to hopefully inform people and educate them on financial literacy, and to entertain people with some do's and do nots. This is not to be considered financial advice. Before trying anything that you learn on the podcast, be sure to consult a professional. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of What They Didn't Teach You in School. This is episode 43. Wow, 43. And we have a very special guest on the podcast today, Raymond Luk. Very happy to have you on today. Thanks for coming in.
Great to be here.
So Raymond is the founder of Hockeystick and Flow Ventures, and he's really active in the Canadian entrepreneurship ecosystem. And for that reason, I wanted to have you on in order to talk about fundraising, entrepreneurship, where Canada and Toronto is going in regards to the growth of their tech ecosystem and entrepreneurship in general, and just get some of your wisdom that is in that head of yours out to our audience.
I'll try to have some wisdom, then I'll try to get it out of my head into
I will try and
audience.
pull it out of your head. Okay.
We'll do it together.
My job is to pull it out of your head. Your job is just to be you.
Let's do it.
All right. So before we get started, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is sponsored by Creator Club. Creator Club is a platform that connects brands and creators in order to work in symbiosis to create content at scale. Is also one of the leading advocates for the creator economy here in Canada, and is here right in Toronto. And I also want to thank Valentina, producer extraordinaire behind the camera. Thank you for coming and filming today, putting everything together. Okay, Raymond, so for the people that don't know much about you, what makes you tick? What are you up to right now?
You know, it's a great time to ask that question for me because I've just been really interested in kind of going back to my roots and thinking about, answering that question. Like, what do I care about? And I spent the last 27 years with entrepreneurs and building companies and being in venture for a while. And when I turned 50, I kind of said, what do I really care about? And I grew up in a household of teachers. And so lately I've just been really enjoying getting out there and teaching and writing. I started writing a newsletter almost a year ago now. And it's one of these things where I said, if I want to learn something, I should probably write about it. Maybe, I don't know if everyone else thinks that way, but that's the way I think about it. And so I started writing, and then that led to doing some online workshops during the pandemic called Pitch Lab. I've done some live workshops now and do some coaching, mentoring. So it's not kind of my full-time thing, but it's something that I'm really passionate about. That's kind of my jam.
That's interesting because, my mom is a teacher as well. And I grew up, she either taught me or I was a part of different kinds of things extracurricularly, working at her school and teaching.
Yeah,
so,
me too.
And I feel like as you get older, you have the ability to impart your wisdom and do more teaching. Did you find that you've always been that kind of mindset and wanting to teach other people, or is it now in your older age, maybe with more financial security or whatever, that you have the ability to do these things more that you want to?
Yeah. Thanks for calling me of older age. I appreciated that. No, just kidding. I think actually I've always enjoyed teaching since I was a kid. I grew up in music. That was my thing. So I grew up playing piano, and then, when you're a preteen teen and you can't get a job somewhere, and it turns out that you can teach piano and actually make money. That was pretty great. Mm-hmm. And so I always really liked teaching. I don't think I was very good at it when I started, but I think I subconsciously really liked doing it. And then for me, I went into business without a business background. We'll talk about that later probably. Yeah. But going from a musician sitting in a studio practicing to being the CEO of a company kind of overnight was a learning experience. So one advantage of kind of having that mindset of I have no idea what the hell I'm doing and I need to learn is that it kind of puts you into that learning mode. where you're soaking up everything you're reading. You don't really have an ego about it. And I think that's a good attitude to have when you're thinking about teaching too. It's not to have an ego about, I'm not smarter than you, or I'm not necessarily even more wise than you. I might be more experienced in certain things. It's a good attitude to have as a teacher, but I think it gives me some empathy for people that I work with, right? Oh, they're, I can really tell when they're in kind of sponge mode and they're just soaking up everything. I love that. And I can also tell when they're maybe not ready and they're pushing back.
I like that. And actually, I want to talk about that a little bit right now because when I was looking into you, I did an extensive creep online of like your background, what people say about you, et cetera. One thing that I found is super interesting is that you did study music in your undergrad and then you went into business.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about your mindset, what was going on during that period of time? How did that transition work?
Yeah, it was just, I've always just pursued my interest. I didn't really kind of overthink my career. I don't think I ever thought about my career. Like one thing about going in, I was in classical music too, so it's like a niche of a niche of a niche. It's when you're in classical music, I don't know that you have an expectation that you're going to be able to earn money and eat and things like that. It's just, it's not really something that you plan for, although I do know a very small number of people who did. So I was just doing it because I enjoyed it. And then I ended up with a bunch of free time. In university, I'd placed out of a lot of credits, so I just had to do stuff. And so I started spending a lot of time in the computer lab. So I was at McGill, the Faculty of Music. This was, in the 90s. So, before like people had intranet, before Netscape, before, this is really dating myself now. but I only bring it up because it was kind of a fun time. It wasn't like everyone had an iPhone and a computer at home and high-speed internet. It was, you go to a room where they have these exotic computers like Silicon Graphics and Sun Microsystems and early Apple, like crappy Apple machines, but with high-speed internet, right? So I think I kind of fell in love with that world and then said to myself, kind of in that naive way, which I think all entrepreneurs do this, or like, it can't be that hard to start a company. I mean, I'm pretty smart. I know computers. Let's start a company. And that's what I did. Wasn't a lot of thought, but I actually think that's the right mindset when you start something, because otherwise you'll never start anything.
Right. If you knew how hard it actually was.
Totally.
Yeah. I can relate to that. So,
Yeah.
So right out of undergrad, did you go and work, or were you like, let's actually start a company here? What was your thoughts, or how did that progress?
Yeah, actually, I did work for 6 months as a programmer.
Oh.
And I worked at this kids games company where it was kind of when I figured out that I could program. Like I was a self-taught software developer, and so I started off like debugging kids games like on CD-ROMs and like old school. Like but it was a great training, and I was also developing some of my own stuff on the side. But it was the first time that I really worked in that field. It only lasted 6 months. I'll never forget I think when I quit, the owner sat me down and said, Raymond, you are never going to be successful as an entrepreneur.
Whoa.
And
why?
You think you're so smart, but you're not. And I'm going to make it so that you can't succeed in this town. And it was like literally out of a movie. And obviously I didn't care at the time, but I just thought like, that's not very nice.
No, what the hell? What was wrong with that guy?
Yeah. And I think that was just him, his personality. But yeah, then I, started a company with a fantastic name called Hard Boiled Egg. And I think I named it Hard Boiled Egg because the domain name was available. And I just thought, well, Apple called their company a fruit. So I can call mine a food. But the one thing that I learned out of naming, and I'm somebody who thinks he's good at naming, so that doesn't mean I'm good at naming, but I enjoy it, is that always name your company or product something memorable and something kind of aspirational, not something accurate. Because what does hard-boiled egg mean? What does Apple mean? What does Netscape mean? Anything.
Right.
So one great thing about that name was that we ended up with a egg-shaped conference table, as one can imagine, an egg-shaped logo. We had all kinds of fun stuff. And when we did a lot of work with the government actually, and they just loved working with us because every time we picked up the phone and called them, on the call display, it would say hard-boiled egg, and they just thought that was the funniest thing. So I think that got us some business. But no, it was like an MBA in in business just running a business, which I highly recommend.
Right. Yeah, I'd say it's probably better than an MBA to
It
just
is.
run the business.
Yeah, and I went back and did an MBA 10 years later. But if a founder asks me today, should I do an MBA? I say, well, you should do it if you want to learn, because it's fantastic. I always think, do many degrees, learn. Don't be dumb. But if your goal is to start a company, then just start the company. And I learned about balance sheets and income statements from reading the QuickBooks help files, because I was like typing in my receipts and things. I didn't understand why I put something in and it wasn't showing up on my P&L. I did this back in the day. I knew nothing about accounting.
Yeah.
So I looked up the Intuit help files, and they're like, well, that's because it's on the balance sheet. Well, what is the balance sheet? And so these are things that I had to learn how to think like an entrepreneur quickly. We had no credit, like no loans, no venture, no investment, at least for the first while. So it was very much eat what you kill, and survival teaches you a lot.
Agreed. And I think that's one of the things that makes great entrepreneurs, especially ones that start ventures and grow them, is the ability to just like, what is that? Okay, let me figure it out.
Yeah, and I think now, because we have this kind of advice industrial complex about startups now, but everyone's telling everyone what to do, and VCs are telling entrepreneurs what to do, and other founders. It's just this whole like SEO tweet storm of like advice, and I think that one of the things that I like about founders who've run a service business is that you have these cycles. You have an idea, you have a product, you have to deliver it, you've got customers, you've got cash in, you've got cash out. It's a business, right? And now the advice is everyone has to think about runway, cash, visibility to profitability, unit economics, all that stuff. But 18 months ago it was cash is like cash flow is stupid. That's a lifestyle business. You're a loser if you're thinking about that. It's growth, and there's just a cycle, right? So I think that people who've gone through or run a consulting business, service business, or just a profitable business have a kind of an insight into that's just reality. That's how capitalism works, and it's useful, as you run any kind of business, even if it's more kind of venture backed, more like in the future. But at the end of the day, even if you sell the company, somebody's buying it for some future cash flow.
Right.
Right. So
good perspective. Yeah, because you definitely heard that term getting tossed around, like, oh, it's a lifestyle. Is it a lifestyle business, or is it a venture-backed kind of like play?
Yeah, I hate that term. And whenever I hear people say that now, I actually actively, publicly correct them. And the opposite of a venture-backed company is not a lifestyle business, right? The opposite of a venture-backed company is just a company, right? I think we just have these weird terms. But I actually heard recently there was a Forbes article about something they call Ecosystem 2. I don't know if you heard this.
No, I haven't heard of this, no.
And I actually like that because, Ecosystem 1 is venture-backed, high growth, high risk, power law, all in, unicorn. But that's a very, very, very small percentage of all business.
Right.
Even in tech. So, but the opposite of that used to be like lifestyle, basically, VCs consciously or unconsciously calling people losers. Like, you're not venture backed because you're not ambitious enough. I've literally heard this so many times. So the idea of saying if it's not venture, it's lifestyle is actually ridiculous. But the idea of calling it ecosystem 2, I like, because it's just a different ecosystem, right? It's not one that's less ambitious. Maybe it's one that's just funded differently, right? So if you raised $100 million in a different, like a non-venture way, you're still not a venture-backed company.
Right. Yeah.
Doesn't mean you're not a great company.
Right. Interesting. And so what's Ecosystem 1?
That's the VC one, right? That's
I see.
And I think most founders have this idea that Ecosystem 1 is what we want because it's where the Facebooks and the Airbnbs and those people were born, which is true, right? And it's capable of creating amazing companies. But I also think that there's a lot of companies from like the MailChimps and the Zapiers and other people that didn't raise venture, right? My favorite is, and the Canadian story is Plenty of Fish. Mm-hmm. So it's really, I'm like that's my dream. Like, this is everyone in Canada's dream should be like Marcus Frein's company.
How so?
Start a business where you're living at home. The business is like in your closet somewhere, and you're just like doing your thing, and not working so hard at the beginning, and it's making $10 million a year in revenue. It's growing. You don't know what to do, and then eventually you sell it for $500 million, right? And you never had a single investor.
Was Plenty of Fish a Canadian company?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't know that.
Vancouver based.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's a great, if you think about it, like why Ecosystem One is so powerful in the minds of founders is that it's just this media thing, right? You hear so much about it, but you don't hear about like Plenty of Fish is an Ecosystem 2 company. You don't really hear about it that much. And that's because I guess there's less media attention on, it's less like rags to riches, usually young men, starting companies. That was always the kind of myth of like 24-year-old hoodie wearing dude in Stanford. And it's all great. It's all true, but it kind of hides the fact that like capitalism is much more diverse than that. Right. So I like hearing different stories.
I love that perspective. Why has the sentiment changed over the last 5 years from, let's go heavy, venture back to now people are so concerned with cash flow and sustainability?
Yeah, it's just the economy, right? So, as like things go up and they go down, and when they're going up, you forget they can go down, and who knows? But it's always a cycle. I think that the reason you hear so much chatter is first you hear about layoffs, you hear about capital drying up, as in every cycle, right? When things go south, capital dries up, and that's part of the normal cycle. It sucks, but it's kind of that's the way it is. You would do the same thing if you're running a fund too. You'd be more conservative.
Right.
So
Fair.
I think you're hearing a lot of chatter about that because, those funds that invested in companies, those companies have to survive. Now, what if you invested at an amazing valuation, this amazing company that you believe in, but it has no cash flow yet, right? Because you're like, yeah, we'll worry about that in the future.
Right.
Now, that's great when the market's going up because there's always somebody else, maybe it's you, who is going to double down and keep going, right? That's amazing. But if that, if the musical chairs stop, then it's like, oh crap, we need to get money somewhere. What are these people over here? Oh, they're called customers. And let's see if we can get them to give us money. And like, oh, they don't want to give us money because our product sucks, or we didn't really think about it. I'm joking. Everyone thinks about customers, right? But it's now people are kind of back to basics. And I think that this is something that entrepreneurs, like going back to what we were talking about of the advantage of running some kind of consulting business, service business, something simple, is it reminds you that, your company is always those things, those fundamental things. It doesn't matter how big it is. You might think that your company is like about tech and finance and all these exotic, amazing things. At the end of the day, it's really about creating value for somebody.
Right.
And when you're doing consulting business, let's say it's like you're one consultant. Let's say I'm a consultant and you're my client. I'm sitting across the table from you. I look in your eyes and I know whether I've done a good job.
Right.
There's no Google Analytics between us. Just me and you and a bubbly fizzy water, and that's it. So I think that's a really good kind of honest way to start.
Nice. Yeah, it's true. And I forget where I heard this quote from, but it was the best way to raise money is from your customers.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people forget that, right?
Yeah.
And one thing is like once you start down a path, though, it's hard to change. So if you're, freemium or you're a SaaS business acquiring customers, super high acquisition cost because you can raise money for the dip, it's really hard to pivot that. I think that's where a lot of the pain is happening in the market is not that they're not great companies out there. It's just companies raising on one set of assumptions, and then it's really hard to go, 180 degrees. Now we're going to be just about customers and revenue, firing non-performing customers, maybe firing non-performing employees, which is happening now.
Yeah.
All those things that it's just reality.
Yeah. Something that I love. I'm a big history nerd. Long time ago, last 50 years, it's interesting to me. And something that I really enjoy doing is interviewing people who have been in business during the 90s and the early 2000s and are still in business today.
Yeah.
So you started your first startup. And it was a hard-boiled egg, right?
Yeah.
And what did you guys do in that startup?
It was an agency. It was
an
like
agency?
it was like an early kind of web development agency.
Okay, cool.
You know, back in the day.
And what made you stop that company?
Yeah, it was. So it was really interesting. As I started that company, it was profitable. It was growing.
Yep.
We made money. It was amazing. I was like, I was really happy. And we kind of were starting out in a time when people were discovering that, hey, we need to build things on the internet and on the web, and we don't know how to do this. So that's why we were successful, right? So we had lots of people calling us to help them build stuff. And then we started having our own ideas for products, and it was right around, I think, 99 into 2000, and we had this idea, and then VC started calling. I remember people from like Goldman Sachs from New York would fly up. I was living in Montreal at the time, and I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what I was talking about, but they would come in and just to see me, and people were doing IPOs on just crazy things, and so I think we had this idea, like, we're going to start this other company and maybe try to do both or do product. And this is when things got really complicated. I would not recommend people doing this. And
why so?
It's really hard to run two companies at once. And it's hard when you've got two competing things. And you think that, but we can do two things at once because it's efficient. It's like having two restaurants with one kitchen. But at a certain point, those those restaurants compete with each other for if they're successful, and that's partly what happened with me and the second company is called OpenDesk, which I still think is a great name too, and it was more of like, think of it like early Google apps, so email, like everything on the web, documents, calendaring, everything, but in like 1999. So hindsight, like maybe like 15 years ahead of its time. So lesson number one is timing is really important. But we raised a bunch of money. We spun that out. I ended up moving over to take that part of the business over when I realized I was just too stressed out and I couldn't run two businesses. And then in 2001, things started going south. The .com bubble kind of burst, and I'll never forget. There's a really visual way for anyone who's too young to know this, that there used to be this magazine called Red Herring, and there's lots of big tech magazines. So A, it doesn't exist, and B, nobody reads magazines anymore. So ancient, but you're the one who brought up history. So, but it was thick, like it was like a Cosmo magazine, like thick, all full of tech ads. And we were an advertiser, lots of other people, and a lot of people who were customers of OpenDesk were venture funded startups way back. And then we all crashed together because they all went out of business, and then that Red Herring magazine went from massive to it was like a pamphlet, right? In like 3 months, IPOs were pulled. We had VCs on our board that had given us a certain amount of money, and then there's going to be another tranche. And then we had a board meeting. They're like, nope, you're not getting any of that money. There's no more money anywhere. Sorry.
So what was that like? You had to literally close up shop, right?
Yeah, like we did. Like, the only thing I'll say, there's something I learned later on, is like, you can't always control the outcome, right? Even though we all want to, right? And everyone feels shame if a company doesn't work, or even I think if a project doesn't work, people don't really talk about it, but they feel like sense of failure. But I think what I learned is that you can't always control the outcome, but you can control how you behave. And so my CFO and I had said, like, this company is like not structured to be like this profitable services company. It's a venture-backed company that had certain assumptions. It's not going to be able to raise money. Nobody's going to buy the company because all those other companies who would buy it are also going out of business. So we kind of decided the best thing we can do is sell as many of the assets as we can, wind it down, make sure the employees are well taken care of, and then I kind of committed to being the last person there, and turning the lights off, selling the furniture, and doing everything that I could humanly possible to do right by my investors and my employees. And I kept in touch with a lot of these people over decades who said later that they compared to many other companies who also suffered during that time, they really appreciated the work, the integrity, and that's it sucks.
Yeah.
But
that must have been a hard time for you.
Yeah.
It was probably a hard time for a lot of people
Yeah.
during that period because
Yeah.
you go through this amazing like bull market during the 90s where everyone's having a great time making money to just like dead in the water.
I mean, yeah, for sure. In the time, like you need to give time, but I think one of the things about being an entrepreneur, it's just the concept of like creative destruction that like shit happens and things are going to happen. But I think the person who gets overly discouraged and says, "Oh, we've disproven that didn't work, we failed, I quit. I'm going to go be an accountant or
Get
something."
a job at the bank.
Yeah, like that's one type of person. The entrepreneur says, "Man, that really sucks. That's really painful. But oh man, what about this other idea? Or oh, what about this other thing?" And it's just like this pathological need to just create new things. And one of the things that when something goes away, what it gives the entrepreneur is just time. And all of a sudden, it's like, holy crap, I have all this time to think now. And so I wasn't really worried about, like I'm generally a forward-looking person, not backwards. And again, having that confidence of having started a company, being a classical musician and starting 2 companies and making money and, doing things early in my career, it kind of just gave me confidence to say, don't worry about it, just keep going. And that's what I did.
Okay, yeah. Because many people, I wanted to ask you about your mindset on this because even like myself, like I don't want to fail. I'd be really pissed off or down on myself maybe if I failed like that.
Yeah.
And many entrepreneurs are like that. They might have started their first company, let's say 100 people start a company.
Yeah.
A lot of them are going to fail, 999 of them.
Yeah.
Or 99 of them.
Yeah.
And then the majority of them won't try the second time.
Yeah.
And then even the ones that try the second time, if they fail, they won't try a third time.
Yeah. Which is a shame, right? Because you learn so much more when things don't work out than when they do. I mean, the reality is that even if I think about successes that I've had and things when they've gone well, I can't take all the credit as much as I'd like to, but I can't take all the credit. There's other people, there's luck, there's timing, there's all kinds of stuff that happens. When you fail, though, it's clearer, like, oh, this is a lesson that's very crystal clear that I can learn, which maybe something I did or a mindset or all those things. So it's a shame when people try things and it doesn't work out and they don't try something else. That's the best time because you have this incredible experience. I don't know. I think it's probably just personality. I think my view is that, like, having started lots of companies and I work with founders every single day, is that like I see the failures every single day, like every pitch, every product, every bug. Like that's just life. There's nothing is perfect when you're starting something small, and so you kind of get used to it, that it's just part of the journey, and don't try to like a failure of like your software product. Let's say you're building a software product is not a failure of your character. It's just stuff happens. It's hard. And let's say you want to raise money, you can't. It's not a failure of you are bad and the market says you personally are bad. It's just the market's the market. So
I love that.
You got to learn to kind of move on.
I love that. When you started these companies, I want to start moving into now like the 2000s.
Yeah.
When you started these companies, was it always you? Did you have business partners that you started with?
Yeah, it was mostly always me. Like that's not something I would do differently. So, I've always been kind of solo founder and then brought in, let's say, another tier of people. But I think, my advice to people now is don't do that because it's really hard. And
how so?
It's a lot of weight to carry. And also there's too much pressure for one person to have all the skills, even the network. I can't know everybody. So I think having more co-founders, like, let's say a team of 2 or 3 is ideal. Now, it's really hard to found a team. So I've got, like, I think if I can go off on a bit of a tangent of how to do that, it's what we should all do is spend way more time and go more slowly when we create companies. So we shouldn't incorporate companies. We shouldn't create companies. We should spend like a year working with a few people. It's not a company, it's just a project, part-time. We should really get to know each other, and that should take as long as it should take, maybe literally 12 months. Then after that, we should say, hey, it looks like there could be a really cool product here. Let's just start building. We should do that for another X months, maybe a year. No incorporation, no nothing, no accelerators, no raising money. We should just, because that's the way you know who you're working with. Do you have the same passions, and whether you're working on something worthwhile? I think people make a commitment way too early. Let's start a company. You get half, I get half. Let's start this. Let's do this. And you're committed. And the worst thing that can happen at that point is somebody gives you $250,000 to get started. Now you're committed.
Right.
But for no reason. We don't know each other. We don't really know our product. We definitely don't know our market. And I think that something I've been thinking a lot more about is, why are we in such a rush?
That's good advice. That's good advice. Because you see it happen so quick, so often. It's like, oh, this idea, that's great. Okay. Then the first thing people do is incorporate. And then, okay, let's get going without even like testing if this is a real thing. Is there product market fit? One of the biggest reasons that I find that businesses fail is a misalignment of founders.
Yeah.
And they start working together. Like incorporating is like getting married with somebody without the romantic and sexual aspect of it, which makes it actually worse than a normal marriage, you know? And for that reason, there should be that dating period where you really get to know each other, the good things, the bad things, and you're okay with it.
Yeah, there's a great book by Noam Wasserman, The Founder's Dilemmas. It's probably the number one book I recommend to people. Unfortunately, whenever I do workshops and talk, I said, here's the book that you should have read before you started your company, but you didn't read it, but you should still read it now. Because there's a lot of, it's hard to renegotiate, right? It's hard to say, we started the company on certain assumptions, which are based on absolutely nothing. And now that we know each other, things are different, but we still have the same split, and I don't like that, and I'm resenting you. And so it is really hard, but I think the book goes through how to do that. And I recommend people do that, because otherwise the company usually just goes completely boom in a bad way. But yeah, so I think there's a lot more thought should go into the early. Like when I ran Year One Labs, which was this kind of venture fund / venture studio in the 2000s, we were the first to say we like the acceleration model, but we want to invest in the entrepreneur, not the idea, because the idea is dumb and who cares, and it's going to change. So what we did was we partnered with Google, and we ran these hackathons in Montreal, in our office, and we just bring a bunch of people together and just said, here's some founders. It's a fun competition for the weekend. We'll give you pizza, beer, and you build stuff. And then we would vote on who was the best. And then we didn't really care about what they built, but we were looking for certain things, creativity and intelligence and compatibility. And then we funded those companies out of the hackathons.
When was this?
This was 2000 and maybe 11.
Okay, cool. Yeah,
it's been a long time. I know I should know this because it was basically the fund was it was a 1-year program, and we had a bunch of companies we invested in. We sold our first graduate was a company called Local Mind, started by Lenny Rachitsky, who runs Lenny's newsletter, and he sold that to Airbnb and did really well, and he's like so talented. He would have been talented no matter what. But we enjoyed bringing him from San Diego to Montreal in February. He'll never forget that. So we sold that, sold another company. Other companies had no exits, but then we just waited for Airbnb to go public for almost a decade. And when they went public, now we've made money for our investors. We wound that down. And
that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it was a great success story for really, like, I'm not just saying this. I think the thing that I'm most proud of is the impact we had on the entrepreneurs, including Lenny and others. That they were amazingly talented people. We worked with them for a short amount of time, helped them out for a short amount of time. I feel like that's what acceleration is. And whether they ended up selling their company to Airbnb or doing something else, that's something I'm really proud of.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing that. So now, what were you doing during this the 2008 roll up to like the recession during that period of time, and how did you get through that? And did you get like PTSD from like the .com bubble during that period of time? How did you navigate through that?
boy, I'm gonna start to forget some of these dates, but so somebody can look it up and call me out on my memory later. But what I remember about that kind of downturn was almost like I didn't really notice it that much. I think that I was running Flow Ventures at the time, so it was already like a successful consulting business. I was doing some angel investing. I was really loving the Montreal ecosystem. We'd started startup drinks. We were just we're just having so much fun. And the other thing I'll say is that compared to '99, when there was like zero ecosystem to speak of, by like a decade later, there were VCs. There was no accelerators yet, but there were beginning to be more investors and more of a community of founders in Toronto and Montreal. So as that was growing, there was a recession, but things were just growing so fast that I didn't personally pay that much attention, and it didn't really affect me because I wasn't raising money at the time. Some of the people, like the founders I worked with, they also went through tough times. Like I wrote about this last year about a company I was advising where they were going to shut the business down. This is in Montreal, and the CEO had asked me to come in and basically help tell the news to the team. He'd never done this before, right? It's a terrible thing. People you work with, your friends, you have to tell them you're all going to lose your jobs. And I said, well, before we do that, let's take a look, like, why are we doing this, and what's the actual situation, the money and all that stuff. And he said, listen, here's what we spend, here's what we make, it's just not sustainable. And then we kind of brainstormed a bit, and I just said, but have you asked people if they're willing to help out, to contribute? And he said no. So I would be ashamed to even ask, right? But I knew this company was in the creative world. People just loved working there. And so we ended up coming up with a strategy where he just literally got up on a desk and he told his team that, listen, this is a shit situation and we could go out of business. But, if you're all willing to take a pay cut, like a 50% pay cut, I haven't been taking a salary for 6 months, and I don't expect you to say yes. It was a very emotional kind of moment. But I don't want to close the company without giving us this chance. And surprisingly, people said yes. And, people started it's like being all in the same lifeboat, which as a founder is the best feeling because you spend your whole life carrying this burden of like, it's all on me. If I screw it up, it's my failure. So it's you in the lifeboat. But when the people around you jump into the lifeboat with you, it's an incredible feeling. And then somebody came up with the idea of actually dividing the office in two, like literally building a wall, like a drywall thing right in the middle, because they said, this could be two offices and we only need half. So let's build a wall, which they did. Let's sublet the other half of the office. And then between all those things, they were break even. And
amazing.
So it was very tough, but I know people were going through those stories. For myself, it was probably also because it was the second kick at the can. It was, founders, like I have this saying, which I probably stopped saying now, which is there's never a recession when you're an entrepreneur, which is not true. But I say it because it's never easy to get money as an entrepreneur. It's not like during the boom times, the banks were just throwing money at you. You want an unsecured bank loan? No problem. No personal guarantee. That doesn't happen even in the best time.
Yeah.
So when credit is more tight, and that's just the normal default. So that's kind of what was my experience.
Okay, true. And so do you have any advice for entrepreneurs going through a difficult time like right now where are we in a recession? I don't know. That's what the media says. Credit is tight, but I just read this morning that Canada overexceeded their jobs creation. Same with the United States. So like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah.
But currently, right now, it's a difficult time for entrepreneurs. Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, it's like try to tune out the bullshit. Like there's a lot of, it's not like cool to say, we just want to create a great product or service and make money and do right by our customers. And a lot of like startups, a lot of founders maybe feel a bit weird saying they serve their customers. I've never had an issue with that. If I start a business, I serve my customers. That's hopefully why I exist.
Yeah.
But I think it's a bit of back to basics of like tune out all the bullshit. You have to create something of value pretty quickly now, and not kind of tune out the noise of like, are you growing fast enough? And there's this weird thing where it's like tech companies are measured by how many employees they have, but it's probably a Canadian thing because the government. The government's like the largest LP in Canada for all the VCs, and really they want to see jobs created. Maybe going to your statistic, but it's a silly way to measure your company. You should want to have the most revenue with the least employees if you're a capitalist,
Right.
But I think and then maybe some of the other BS that's out there about people too. It's like during the boom times, everyone was 4-day work weeks, and it's all about perks and working from home and creating perfect conditions for everyone. Don't measure people by time, measure them by output. And I think a lot of that's just complete bullshit because I have I consider myself a nice person, and you can ask others, they might, hopefully they'll agree. But it's like, for me, the ultimate respect I have for people who work is that I believe in them. And I think that they're capable of amazing performance and amazing stuff, like being smart, learning, all that stuff. But I think there's all this bullshit out there about we need to create the perfect conditions for people. Otherwise, they don't want to work. And I don't believe that. And I think you're starting to see that with like mass layoffs with companies that were very vocal about like perfect conditions.
Right.
And now they're more vocal about we need performance. And I've never thought of the word performance as a bad word. Like, imagine if you're an athlete. You're paid to perform. You're not
Right.
paid to not perform. And it's not a job, it's a passion. Hopefully everyone who works has a passion. So I think if you tune out the noise, just focus on probably what in your heart is the right thing to do.
And in regards to what's happening right now with work from home and coming into the office, we have this, even before the pandemic, everyone was talking about just let me work from home. That's better, right? And then during the pandemic, everyone worked from home, right? And now we're in this like weird position where people want you to come into the office, but it's like a hybrid. What are your thoughts on coming back, like getting back to the office culture right now?
I mean, I'm firm believer that companies work better when people work together, and I know not everyone believes that. That's fine. I think that people, certainly like startups, right? Startups need to be together. I think that yes, it's possible, and people will give counterexamples of like this company is all remote. Sure, it can happen if you're perfect and every single person you hire is in their DNA. That's how they're wired. But for the most part, you need to be together. It's really hard to whiteboard over Zoom. It's really hard to be creative. You can't read body language, and I feel like getting out in the world and getting together with people, like you said, like starting a company is like a marriage. It's you're not part of, like you're not in your marriage by remote. Hopefully,
Right,
long distance relationship. So I feel like people need to be together. Now, was it 3 days, 4 days? Like I don't really care, but I don't really believe in this idea that it's better for the company that people be distributed. I think it's better for the individual, and that's valid, but I don't think it's better for the company at all.
Yeah, I think so. It's tough though, because I also see that like when we come here on Wednesdays, everyone's in the office. There's also a lot of wasted time in being in the office together.
Yeah.
But I battle back and forth on it because I'll walk through the office and everyone's like shooting the shit, talking with each other, kind of like wasting time.
Yeah.
That actually people are more productive at home. If you're a good worker, like you're more productive at home, less distractions because people are used to it now. But then also that wasted time of like shooting the shit with each other actually breeds creativity, new ideas, and like that like uncontrolled bouncing around of ideas is actually good at the same time. So I think just somewhere in the middle is the answer.
Yeah, I think work is not typing. Like work is not just sitting in front of your computer. I mean, what is work? What is creativity? I think it's, I think what I'm saying is that that creative energy between people. And I think people forget that when you're doing anything worthwhile, taking risks, you have doubts. You don't know, especially if you're in a startup, no matter how confident you are, you don't really know. And I think artists are like this too. When you're painting or you're composing something, it's terrifying because you don't know. If you're writing a book, you don't know how it's going to work out. And I think being around people who have that mindset is amazing energy to support you. Sitting in front of your computer and just typing probably works for some people, but that's not really productivity the way I define it in a startup. That's not creative. That's not, and I think for better or for worse, that type of work is most likely to be disrupted by AI, like in the next 5 minutes. And I think people need to think about that when they look at their jobs of how much of what you're doing, because I always hear people say, like, don't measure me by my time, measure me by my results. And I think there's a double-edged sword there too.
How so?
If you only want to be measured by your result, and that result is now going to compete with AI, let's say you're editing video or you're a copy editor, and you don't want to be really part of a company. You just want to be like a freelancer, paid for results and paid well for your results, I think is the assumption. Some of those things, if AI ends up really being much better at, say, 80% of your job, and you have no connections to any company or any mission, and you're indistinguishable from a bot at that point because nobody ever sees you. Well, it's either somebody overseas or ChatGPT is really going to come for your job, and I think that's something that people don't think about.
I like that perspective. Very good. One other thing I want to throw at you is hustle culture. Yeah. So, you've been there. There was probably times where you had to put in the 70-hour work weeks,
Yeah.
Or was there?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me a little bit about hustle culture and what your thoughts are that as you've been progressing in your career.
Well, listen, I didn't even know what that word was for the first 23 years of my career. So I went when I was, so what not to do. I went like 7 years when I started my first company without taking a vacation. One time I flew to Whistler to go snowboarding, and I was in the airport, and then I got a call that I could go back and pitch a VC, and I just turned around and went back. It was like the worst. It was the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life. I regret that. But back in the day, it was, it wasn't called hustle culture. It was just, survive or grow, and it was just all 24/7. And I believe in hard work. Like, don't start a company if you are not interested in working hard, not because of it's like some punishment, but because it's your passion, right? Probably everything I learned about business, I probably learned playing music. Business is a practice. It's not something you can just read a book. Like, I can't say, hey, you should read a book on how to play piano and then make you a better pianist. Like,
right.
You have to practice.
Right.
And so there's so much I learned about repetition that I think applies to business, which applies to hustle, right? You have to practice. If you're bad at sales, you better practice that 70 hours so that you don't have to do that 70 hours later. But I think where as I get older, I think the part that I figured out is that the problem with hustle culture is that if you're the founder or CEO, your main job is to think and to make decisions. And that's really, it looks like it's easy because you're staring out the wall, like staring out the window. But how do you know what the right decision is?
Right.
You can't know it by typing. You can't know it by speaking and pitching. And you have to know it by thinking, experience, going for a walk, taking time off. Like, that's something that's I've probably really bad at until recently. But, for me, like, I meditate now, and that's probably been the best thing for my business performance is throughout the day asking myself, how do I actually feel before I start making a decision, right? So how do I feel emotionally, mentally, and meditating lets me figure that out and gives me focus. Back in the day, it was, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to keep working harder. That doesn't get you anywhere.
Right. Well, maybe that Whistler trip would have really helped you then.
I know. Regrets.
Did you go back to Whistler?
I have, yeah, many times after that. But that was a low point.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about Hockeystick and Flow Ventures and what you're doing now in your career. Flow Ventures is it 20 years old or almost 20 years old?
No, it's like 16, 17
Wow.
years. Time goes by.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So tell me about Flow Ventures and Hockeystick and what you're doing now. What are they?
It's funny that like almost if I have some perspective now, pretending I'm at the top of Whistler, looking back over my life, but it's turns out what I really care about is finance, like entrepreneurial finance, like how companies raise money and how broken the systems are and how silly the whole process is. And to answer your question about what I'm doing, that like, the three main things I'm doing today are just really different sides of that. So Hockeystick was started to help companies raise really venture capital, right? Because we had identified, like we tried many things along the way before we got there, but the idea was, why is it so hard for entrepreneurs to meet VCs and get connected?
Especially here in Canada.
Yeah, and it's still, it's still hard, right? It's kind of ridiculous. So that was trying to solve that problem, and we were using data and products, and we still do that. Flow actually had started 17 years ago helping companies raise everything but venture capital. So grants and loans and government programs and things like that. And over the years has raised about probably $350 million for companies. So
amazing.
It's been like a big seed fund, right? Think of it that way. And then the third part that I do is working on teaching and writing. And what I teach and write about is also people fundraising. And I don't just talk about finance, but I talk about their pitches, their story, their strategy, and also connecting with VCs. And I ran these workshops called All Fundraising, No Bullshit recently as a way to kind of deprogram and kind of provide a bit of a different perspective, mostly just because I'm so frustrated with the whole process, kind of on behalf of founders. So those three things, Hockeystick, Flow, All Fundraising, No Bullshit, and writing, it's really the same thing. So they've kind of merged into the Raymond portfolio of stuff that I'm doing. And it's a lot of fun because now when I meet an entrepreneur, I'm not just saying, you should go sign up for Hockeystick, or, oh, you should be a client of Flow, or you should go to one of my workshops. It's great when I work with somebody and I can look at their situation and say, I know you're talking to me because you want to raise money. And I literally did this yesterday on a Zoom call, but I said, but why? Like, why are you raising money? Like, if you're two founders, you're both technical, why don't you spend the next year? You're not going to make very much money, but why not spend the next year just building your product? Mm-hmm. And it might seem like, oh, it's not fair and it's suffering, but you're going to spend the next 6 months suffering trying to raise money, and then you're going to make a promise that you might not be able to keep. Uh-huh. And so having the perspective of like venture, non-venture, some coaching, some writing gives me the ability to just try to do the best thing for that entrepreneur. And that's what I care about. Like my whole career, if I do this another 25 plus years, it'll always be working with founders. That's my thing.
I love that. Why don't you talk to me a little bit about the funding cycle of an entrepreneur and what the stages are? Define those stages for the people that that don't know, like the difference between angel versus pre-Series A, Series A, et cetera. But also like what is your POV on when should somebody be raising money at these stages and things that people should look out for?
Yeah. I mean, I'll assume that we're talking about like a tech startup, not a services company. But I think the first thing is like, don't define your stages based on the financing. Like even saying angel, seed, Series A, it's all meaningless, right? It means nothing. And that's like, don't define yourself by what the funders say, because the reason they call themselves those terms is that's their context. You don't really need to care about that. And so I hate when people get it like, I'm raising my pre-seed extension. It's like, who cares? it's money, okay? So you're raising money. Let's just all agree to that. So I think like for me, if I kind of decode that a little bit, at the beginning, when you start, you're really forming the company. So like forget the labels, whatever you call it. It's you don't know what you're doing and you don't know who you're working with. So that's the beginning stage. And for some people, that's they want to raise money. Some people they do an accelerator. Some people they do a consulting business. Some people they just build. But I think this stage of it's just like forming the thing, the hypothesis. That's just call it company formation. And then you've got this stage of like, typically other people call it like angel seed or, seed to Series A, but really it's kind of like experimentation. And no matter how certain you are when you go out there, it doesn't even matter if you've got revenue, you know, until you have a view to like a scalable business model, which could take you like 5 years, right? I don't know how long it would take you, but you're just experimenting, and that's where you build your intellectual property. So everyone's in such a rush to get through there, like, oh, we went through our pre-seed in 6 months and now we're raising our blah blah blah. It's great. It's great if it works for you, but in reality, that place where you're failing and you're pivoting and you're trying things out, that's your intellectual property. That's your research. That's when you're going to earn everything you're ever going to know about your company is right there. And one of the problems is we're trying to rush companies too quickly because we want to get them funded. But who cares about the funding? They just make a great company. So but to relate it back to the funding question, if you can survive that period, I didn't say it's easy, by the way, I'm just saying that's just life. But if you can survive that period, what's fundable, whether it's a seed or a Series A kind of round, is they're funding something that is starting to look like a business. It's not complete. Your team might not be complete. Your tech is not complete. Your market or revenue is not that great, but it's starting to look like something. So that is a milestone where the investor is saying, I'm investing in, I know what I'm investing in. Whereas before, if you're able to raise the pre-seed money, it's, I don't know what I'm investing in. So when I was running Year One Labs, we were just open as like, we have absolutely no idea whether your idea is going to work. We assume it won't work. But most investors still, like the pitch at the beginning is still the idea, which I find really silly. So then after Series A, whatever, if we want to use labels, then now you're measured more, it becomes less venture capital actually, right? It becomes more your revenue and growth and potential cash flows, and it really becomes more like you're fundable because you're a good company and there's actually competition. VCs have competition to put money in, but if they got in early, they've got those pro rata rights. That's the whole model. So I think later on, and we're starting to see this in the kind of ecosystem 2 thing we were talking about before, there is more competition. Like people are buying and operating. This company Tiny out in Victoria has been buying and buying companies that were venture funded and restructuring them and operating them as dividend generating profitable companies.
Cool.
So I don't know them. I just saw them, but I love that model, right? So I think that it's kind of I didn't quite answer your question, but
it's very interesting along the way.
Yeah,
Because don't define it by how these VCs are. Just really focus in on like what is it that you're trying to accomplish in raising money, and don't just raise money for the sake of it. Because I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs go into it like, okay, we have to raise our angel round and then pre-Series A and then Series A, and they try and like fit their business model into those traditional naming conventions or rounds instead of the other way around, which I think is really refreshing insight.
You have to have your own point of view, right? So I think that, you know, one of the mistakes people make is thinking there's a standard. And I always say, well, what is a startup? Startup is you're trying to like break things, disrupt industries. You know, all these startups that like the Ubers and the Airbnbs are things that we weren't doing 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So you can't just follow a playbook. Another, you know, here's another kind of hot take kind of statement is like, you can't actually learn from other people's success. So
tell me a bit about that. What do you mean?
Like when you study, like so many people, let's say, study the Airbnb pitch deck, and I always tell them, don't do that. I've studied
the Airbnb pitch deck.
It's not a good pitch deck. Like the seed deck, it's not a good pitch deck. I've written about this. And I think the reason that we think it's a good pitch deck is because Airbnb subsequently became successful. But you don't know that, you have no evidence that the pitch deck is what made them successful. And I have evidence that it actually probably hurt them. But it's I think the reason that we go for these standards like Series A, Series B, this is because we like to put people on pedestals. And when we see a successful entrepreneur, like I love when people on Twitter say, I just raised a $10 million Series A, here's how you can do it. And that's like saying like, I just did heart surgery once in my life, and the patient hasn't died yet. So I'm going to tell you how to be a surgeon, right? You have no repetitions on how to do that. Doesn't mean that you're wrong, by the way, right? You can be right, but you know, there's this idea that since one person did it this way, you know, Airbnb, Facebook, any successful company, we should follow it. But what people don't realize that I think there was a study that out of 21,000 venture-backed companies, only 100 return 50x return or more. So these really nice, juicy returns. That doesn't mean there's lots of other crap companies in there, but it means that we're not hearing those stories. We're not hearing the stories of maybe great companies, great founders, great returns for the founders, and decent returns for the VCs, where we're not following their pitch decks. So we don't hear about that. And so that's what I mean is you can't always learn as much about success as you think.
I like that. Okay, we're going to wrap with a couple last questions. It's been amazing having you on. Like you are a philosopher of startups. Okay, I love how the way you always bring it back to like more of a conceptual or philosophical framework on how we approach these questions. Really like that about you. That's usually something that I find with people that have been doing things for a long time.
Yeah,
is that younger people usually take a very technical approach on answering questions versus the people that I've masters of their craft, I would have to say, they use concepts, stories, and frameworks to spread like knowledge.
Yeah.
Versus younger people, they're more technical and like.
Yeah, it's not for lack of trying. Like I've tried all those top 10 ways to do whatever, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah. Okay. So couple last questions. First thing is, what's a technology or industry or space that is interesting you right now for the future?
Well, obviously, like everything related to AI but it's not really an industry. But I think that we're just in for a shitstorm of change and societal change. But I think if I bring it right back to startups, I think that people, like everyone assumes that because AI is so, it's hot and it's so disruptive that it's the next venture capital industry. I actually think that maybe the bigger disruption going back to ecosystem 2 will be AI will allow 10,000 entrepreneurs to create very similar products where it's not winner take all. It's just they each make $2 million a year, and it's amazing. So
interesting.
Maybe the next Shopify is not a Shopify, venture funded. It's 5,000 things that look kind of like Shopify. They're commodities, but they're owned by the owners, right? And it's a good business for Shopify to do.
Interesting. And so what do you think are 1 to 2 characteristics that you have the repetition of working with so many entrepreneurs? What are like maybe 1 to 3 characteristics that you find make that similar across the ones that succeed?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll boil it down to 2 things because I don't like saying characteristics because I feel like it makes people feel like, oh, if I don't have that, I'm not cut out to be, an entrepreneur. And I think everyone potentially could be. It's not for everyone, but everyone potentially could be. There's a difference. I think number 1 is you have to have some self-awareness of knowing what makes you happy. It's like, don't be a doctor because your parents tell you to be a doctor. And same thing. It's like, if you don't know yourself, then it's really hard to start a company because there are so many moments that are not enjoyable. And you'll just be very confused. And I would say that's like a big part of my career. Just, why am I doing this? But the other part, maybe more nuts and bolts, is the founders I find that are most successful are the ones that are really open to learning, that they see it as a craft. So I'm not just so anxious to get to the result, because we all fantasize about the result, but I really see myself learning. I want to learn. I'm studying. I'm reading. I'm not looking just for the shortcuts. I'm looking for opportunities for me to practice. It goes right back to music. That's how you become a good musician and an artist. You don't think about getting up on stage in Carnegie Hall, or maybe you do, but what really, really makes your soul alive is you in the practice room playing and feeling, oh, this is why I'm doing this.
Amazing. Okay, where can people find you online or get in touch with you?
Yeah, easiest way is raymondluk.co. That's my newsletter, my Substack. They can always reach me there and subscribe, of course. And then LinkedIn. So I'm pretty active, talking, commenting, publishing on LinkedIn.
Okay, amazing. Last question. We ask this to everyone who comes on the podcast. Last question. What is one piece of wisdom that you wish you knew much sooner?
I wish that I wish early in my career that I would have kind of surrounded myself with more founders. Like, I do that now with founder groups, but, I wish that it would have been less lonely. And I wish that I would have understood that if I just find, even one or two or three other people and kind of form a group and help each other, like a cohort, a little peer group, I wish that I would have done that at the beginning, because it would have been a lot more enjoyable journey. But I would have realized that all those times I beat myself up for doing something and thinking like, I'm such a loser because this person quit. Well, that happens to everybody. I just didn't know it.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, that's true. Because being an entrepreneur can be lonely.
Yeah.
And if you're not talking with other people and realizing, what I'm going through, other people are going through, could be pretty hard.
Yeah, totally. Just a different perspective.
Raymond, you are absolutely amazing. This has been a pleasure for me as an entrepreneur myself. I'd love to have you on again to talk about other things in the future, because an hour flew by, but we could probably go for another hour.
Well, I'd love to come back.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Much appreciated.
Thanks.
Until next time, what they didn't teach you in school. Ciao.